we're going to make one more mold, and this is going to be a cavity pour mold. I'm going to use some aluminum foil to protect our model because we are going to put clay over the entire piece. This clay is already rolled out to a specific thickness that I want my mold to be in. And then we're going to build up the clay some further to develop some keys. So you can see keys going down, a flange, and also a pour spout. First, we're going to create a support shell around the clay. To separate the two halves, I'm using some aluminum shims here. If you would like to see a full video on how to make cavity pour molds, you can simply click on the link and that will take you to that video. And again, we're going to use some sonite wax on all the surfaces where the support shell is going to be built up against. And for the support shell, I'm using epoxy putty called Freeform Air. Fantastic material to work with, 1-to-1 mix ratio by volume. We can simply mix the two components together until we get a uniform color, no streaking. And then we're going to build it up onto first one half and then the second half of the support shell of our model. Now, the material itself is easy to apply, easy to mix, and with a little bit of isopropyl alcohol, it smoothens out easily over the entire surface, creating a nice and smooth shell. The freeform air is allowed to cure for 24 hours before moving on to the next side. Now, once the first side has cured up, we can remove the shims and then put some sonite wax onto the first half of the support shell. More freeform air is dispensed, mixed, and then applied to the second side of our support shell. And just like on the first half, we're going to use some isopropyl alcohol to smoothen out the entire texture of the support shell so it doesn't leave any sharp edges. Now, the freeform air is allowed 24 hours to cure before demolding. And once that is all cured up, we can go ahead and demold the model by taking the two halves of the support shell apart and removing all the Sculptex clay that was built up on the inside of the shell. Now, to prep the shell for the next step, which is pouring off the mold, we're going to have to put some air vent holes. These vent holes will allow the air to escape out of the mold as we're pouring silicone into the mold cavity. To allow for good airflow, I used a 1/4-inch drill bit, which is about 6 millimeters. Anything larger than that is unnecessary. It could potentially weaken the area where you're drilling the hole. And then we can simply remove that aluminum foil that we used to protect our model. And then we're going to secure the support shell around the original model. I'm using some hot melt glue for that. It should hold the support shell temporarily onto the working surface while we make the rest of the mold. Now, for this mold, I decided to use the Dragon Skin 10 NV because I know it has low viscosity. It's going to degas on its own very well. Has a easy mix ratio 1-to-1 by volume. It's fast setting, and the rubber itself, Dragon Skin, is very elastic, and I'm going to be able to have this be a one-piece mold that just peels back and off the model. Now I'm going to pour the mixed silicone into our cavity here, and as the silicone leaks out of the air vents, we're going to plug those with some Sculptex oil-based clay. The Dragon Skin 10 NV is allowed to cure for 75 minutes before demolding. Once the silicone has cured, we can go ahead and demold our project by removing the support shell and simply peeling away the silicone mold. And here you have the end result. All right, let's take a look at our cavity pour mold that we created. Now, this mold here took 52 hours to create. Out of that 52 hours, there was 2 hours that we actually worked on the mold. The rest of the time was spent waiting for the materials to cure. The freeform air that we made the support shell out of is a long curing material. Now, the material cost for this mold was $84. Even though we used 2 materials for the mold itself, it was still cheaper to make a cavity pour mold than it was to make the block mold as far as the material that we used. Now, why would you create a cavity pour mold over a brush-on mold or a block mold? Cavity pour molds lend themselves really well for glove molds or sock molds that are all one piece, and you can control the thickness of the molding rubber very precisely when you're creating the clay buildup over your model. Now, I wouldn't use a cavity pour mold over difficult models that have a lot of limbs sticking out, but more models that are unified in shape and lend themselves much easier for a unified mold that you can easily pull over the model. Now, small models just doesn't make sense to make cavity pour molds off because they're so tiny that a block mold would be just easier. Now, some of the pros for a cavity pour mold is the fact that it does use less material than a block mold would. Therefore, the cost savings versus a block mold is great. It's much lighter than a block mold would be because the amount of molding material that we're using is something really important to consider when working on medium SARs or even larger molds. As well as there's no seam line in the mold itself, which lends itself to making glove molds or sock molds out of. Now, one really nice thing about cavity pour molds is once you have the support shell and your rubber mold burns out for casting hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of castings into it, it will eventually burn out. You can take the support shell off that mold, put it around your model, and now pour a new glove mold off of that model, which makes it really convenient for production style molds. Now, some of the downturns to this type of mold is the fact that it does take a lot of time. It's time consuming to make this type of mold. It does require a higher skill level because you have to think about the support shell first before making the actual mold inside, as well as it does take multiple materials to create the mold. Besides the molding materials, we ended up having also to use the Sculptex oil-based clay to make the spacing in between the support shell and the model before pouring.